The 10-year Jubilee Platinum Edition 2013. Now with even more apocalypse. No, that's all. No more. So this year we had an important problem because the highlights from our show are the Balls of Steel Award, and the problem there was that to some extent the momentum was taken out because it's a very obvious thing. So let's do it from the start, at the start. So normally we have a tough competition for the award, but there wasn't that much to gain there. But it was a strong field of contenders. Could you take that out again? Thanks. Good. We do actually need the whole space. Sorry. So, as we said, the competition was tough, but the winner was quite clear in one day. There wasn't that much other competition, but still what we have collected over the year we would like to impart to you. So there was this guy, the head of Israel's nuclear program, whose house was burgled, and the suitcase was taken out. And then there was a Serbian government official who wanted to prove that the raising of the limits for aflatoxins in milk, of rather ugly poison, raising the limits for those was harmless. You can always adjust those and it's still safe. So just a bit, it's quite comparable to the email, just adjust the law and then it's safe. And the same thing goes for food. And the poor minister had to then step forward and drink some milk to show how secure, how safe it all was. And that, of course, would be a nice thing for the email too. Send them email. Let the minister send emails and send an email with the email and no, just say, okay, the email now has to be used for all government communication, internal as well. Let's promote that. And then in return, we won't apply as much pressure in the freedom of information area anymore. Okay, and then there was also someone who we have to say was a rather strong contender for the Balls of Steel Award. You have to have that courage too, don't you? Takes some courage. What the hell? And then there were people who turned the whole thing around, and normally it's the police that captures the drugs, but then people stole 30 kilograms from the police, a symbol image here, symbolic image. Hong, could you just do your job, please? Thanks. So the details are quite funny because months later it was only discovered that the drugs were missing. They were in a house, and for technical reasons, as the press release said, there was no alarm, so you could never notice. And then there was a related case, a rocker group through a mistake, mix-up, was sent a package with drugs from the reserve chamber of the police chamber of criminal artifacts. And the remarkable thing was that they gave them back and said, no, no, we're good rockers. We have nothing to do with that. Yeah, you know this from Hollywood movies, because I found the case numbers quite interesting. There were 50 cases between November in 2012 and April 2013 of cases where someone from behind approached a truck and opened it and got things out. And the truck would only notice that when they had reached their destination. You have to be able to do that. That's not an easy thing. One of the people that quite early in the year found themselves on the list for the Balls of Steel Award was the pianist who was playing at the Gezi Square in Istanbul, gave a concert with his grand piano and was largely celebrated for that. Broadly. And for the improper case, if you just if for the improbable case that you wouldn't know what things normally look like there, here are some images. So you have to have the courage to have a concert in that surroundings. You can see the interesting thing is that other people took up the example, and this is a fantastic image. I think music connects in Kiev too, is the headline. And such demonstrations, on these demonstrations, not unpleasant things, and not only unpleasant things happens. Some people think that a dress is a passive armament, and we're wondering how do they get this idea, and maybe they play games like this and see images like that. So when they see a woman in a red dress, and here again, Brazil, obviously terrorists, and the trendsetter in demo fashion is Ukraine, obviously. Hang on. It was much better. It went much better better later.
Well, we have quite a bit to learn from that. There's quite a nice piece of art here with the lighting and everything here from Egypt. And of course, we have been monitoring the trends during these protests. If anything new's coming up, from a technical standpoint or from a hardware standpoint. This year there has been a new trend.
Diggers.
So this is also the protests in Turkey and Gezi. But we've also seen this in Berlin, where the diggers were used and they were digging a trench there. But after that, there was not much news about that. But now we have that in the Ukraine. And, well, let's say German technology. Well, we are using Volvo right now, but we're still big on that whole industry. You have to build quality hardware, and of course you need electricity for that. And we have always been told that, well, when they just turn off these nuclear power plants, then we will have big problems and the lights will go off. So what's interesting was this news report from the basically from the statistical office that we have been exporting as much electricity as never before. And I guess it must be because of all these energy-saving light bulbs that we're now using. Now, about our traditional Anatoly Bugorsky Award for Applied Nuclear Safety, So just to remind you, Anatoly Bugorsky is the only known man in existence who held his head into the ray of a collider, and he survived. And this is incredible. So as you can see, it's not dangerous at all, this whole technology. So everything that is used in nuclear power plants, you can really learn a lot from the job advertisements. For example, this one is a nuclear power plant from Finland. Might be a little hard to read, but they are looking for someone who is able to do PHP, C#, Java, jQuery, HTML, CSS, and SQL for large environments with more than 450 tables, of course. And as it always is with this kind of technology, you really need a mascot for that. I won't open it, you open it. Oh, maybe later. Or is it time critical, maybe? Will it open by itself? Or does it have some time? Alright, thanks. Well, these, oh well. Well, you cannot see the next slide, but this is it. Now, with these nuclear power plants, and there is laughter and cheer from the audience as a
Trojan
looks like
horse.
a Trojan horse is being pulled onto the stage.
Next time we'll move to Howl 2. There's no mood here, no atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree. Something fell off that pony. Do we have to worry? Well, as long as it's not a unicorn, I guess we can carry on. That looks nice after all. I don't think there's anyone in there.
Not a Trojan? Okay, you do it. Looks like leaflets. Files. It's a leak that we'll have to evaluate first. I think this is your department.
Oh my god. Is it your turn? Is it my turn?
That's what we are wondering here too.
Oh wow, there are cookies. Thank you very much.
Are these cookies or full-blown cakes?
It looks like muffins to me.
Yeah.
Well, I was lucky. I don't know how to open a horse after all. I've never done it before. What are you looking for? Tools. I don't have any. Alright, so let's just carry on. Can we have that slide on the screen? Thank you. So when it comes to nuclear power plants...
And the horse is now graciously moving off the stage.
Now, when it comes to nuclear power plants, there are a lot of things that can go wrong. We have learned that over the past few years. And then, of course, you have a problem, especially if the name of your company is the same as the name of the nuclear power plant. And there was this one company that had the harmless name Fukushima Engineering. And all they do is provide cooling equipment for these nuclear power plants, apparently. And they were able to ensure that they had nothing to do with the whole disaster. But, well, when you have that name, you sort of kind of have a problem. So what do you do when you're such a company? Well, of course, you invent some sort of a mascot and use that for some sort of
cartoon character.
And they thought of something that may not be the best choice. And the name of this nice little guy here is Fakapi.
It's working in this room anyway. We're not quite clear how to pronounce it, but, well, it's ringing. Uh-oh. I think this reminds me of this bomb. One missed call. We can understand the intention. It's not what it looks like from the back, I think. I can tell. Next time we'll bring the bomb squad with us when we do this. Later. So it's not just about running nuclear power stations after the explosion. It's about preventing the explosion to actually happen. And with nuclear power stations, a lot of things can go wrong. Some of them harmless, some of them worse. And real professionals get this repaired quickly. We found an example. Sometimes rather quickly it gets important to get things fixed and not wait for materials. If you look closely, you can see a bit of aluminium foil or plastic, cling film, gaffer tape, of course, that everyone of us will take as well, of course, and broomsticks. So a nuclear power reactor like that, to repair that, what do you think of first? Someone didn't have a towel with them, did they? But, well, the real top thing was this news item. And that said, you have to know, in the groundwater, there are evil radioactive rays. And if you do fracking, extract oil or gas by pressing water in the ground, this evil radioactive water is replaced by good, less radioactive water. 2 or 3 additions cannot be explained away fully, but and then we found where this item came from: fracking for the environment. That is a message that deserves an award. And then we have a new award, the Gregory Potemkin Award for Advanced Reality Management. The role model, of course, is Russia. Those that don't know, Potemkin was a lover of a Tsar, female Tsar or Tsar's wife, and had to resettle an area with settlers, and then built a fake village that always, when the Tsars came visiting, he moved it and rebuilt it. And this tradition has been kept alive until today. Here's a Russian village where Putin was about to visit. And before Putin came to visit, you see there's a pot plant there, if you can't see it. So artisan traditions are still there. And as things are with successful role models, you like to learn from them. So even the G8 summit in Northern Ireland, the city was a bit run down, and therefore the money was missing for real repairs, and there were no shops either. They were all empty because nothing was happening. And then the handcrafts, the craft quality wasn't that great. The production quality, And this solution, of course, can be adapted universally. There are some problems in China too. The smog is so thick that surveillance cameras are blocked because they can't see anything anymore. And that, of course, is stupid. The images don't look good. Hong Kong is finally doing something. Through the fog and smog, photos are not as good. And therefore, you have... I found that particularly nice because the woman is actually not in the middle of that fake background, but at the end. But this one uses it the way it's supposed to be. How beautiful it is in Hong Kong. And so much of advanced reality management is happening on TV, isn't it? And way in front was Turkey during the riots at Gezi Park. On state TV, they were caring about the important things, the penguins. No, this is CNN, not even state. This is CNN Turkey on the right, international on the right, and on the left it's CNN Turkey. So CNN Turkey should be renamed CNN Penguin, shouldn't it? It's not just that the public should be fooled, but also the ruling elite, particularly if the rulers are known to like playing the heads-off game, such as the young dictator in North Korea. You know this from Germany. If the new rule is you have to use cyber wars, everyone does cyber wars, so we have to do it too. And that's probably the way it went in North Korea as well. So if quickly they had to do something to build cyber warfare, and they built this cyber war console. Look at the details; it's great. In particular, the small switch there, bottom right, that you could switch with the foot if something had gone wrong to reset the whole thing. And the whole radar dish up there, it's the absolute the crown. Why don't we have such a thing? Well, we only get ponies. Yeah, well, I would like such a Waveland cyber war packet injector from an old piano. So this whole fake imaging, that's something that business is active into, and we had lots of news items where we were asking ourselves, what is actually happening there? How do they get these ideas? And then after a while, we noticed the only reason that we could imagine was that some people, particularly in those large banks that have a lot of money, they just don't care anymore that what they are doing is illegal, immoral, or just bizarre, as long as they earn even more money with that. And to an extent that we can now assume that they don't care what the rest of the planet is going through. So we shouldn't any longer assume any longer that these people are still living on the same planet, because they don't assume that anymore either, regardless of whether they're going to Mars or buying an island, whatever. And a nice example here is a train in Canada that went over the border to Michigan in the US and back, and because it wasn't obvious, they added and took away a few wagons which were never loaded. It was always the same biofuel, and it turns out that the reason is tax relief for exporting to America for the energy change, and therefore they went back and forth across the border and kept cashing in, and it was revealed later on for unpaid bills at the train company, that bills the tracks in Canada, not the ones that make the trains, but the state company that runs the tracks, they had unpaid bills, and TV wanted to know what that is for, and somehow they got into trouble explaining. But it all went okay in the end. There was no disaster, with no oil spill into the environment, because that's what happens in other places, unfortunately. This drilling platform was supposed to be drilling for oil in the Alaskan Sea, but the Alaskan government then suddenly thought, all this oil drilling, we want to have our share, and then they raised taxes if you drill for oil in Canada for more than 12 months, and they were carrying this drilling thing back and forth for repairs, and then there was a larger storm, and the whole thing went aground, and it all went into the media. So we can assume that other places are doing the same thing, but we don't see it because there are no accidents. And keeping with raw materials, Goldman Sachs had a fantastic event this year. I had to read this 3 times before I understood what they actually were doing. The thing is that they are one of the largest. They bought one of the largest aluminium importers, who are storing this. And when they bought this, they had a average delivery time that was raised to 16 months. And for the time that no deliveries took place, they were cashing in for storage. And there were actually laws against that. Because of the size of the stores, they were actually obligated to deliver 3,000 tons. But they were just delivering to themselves a flotilla of trucks that were going around in circles, basically, to avoid having to deliver 3,000 tons a day. And you keep wondering how do these people get these ideas? And of course, the big role model is the Pentagon. The Pentagon buys aeroplanes which they don't need, and then just stores them and puts them. This airplane graveyard in the desert where it's nice and dry, and they just put the planes there straight from the factory and just put them on hold. And it's a kind of economic support message, but this was not an American supplier, which makes the whole thing a bit strange. It was an Italian one. So there was probably some bribes that flowed there, and someone doesn't find the contract anymore for cancelling in time or something. Was that thrown out with Saturn V files, maybe stored in the World Trade Center or something? No MiG among the planes there, no. So it's not always at such a large scale. Sometimes there are smaller actions that are interesting. In this case, 100 copies of a Ford CD set, the Bob Dylan Copyright Extension Collection, Volume 1. It was about the EU changing their copyright laws, and some of the early works of Bob Dylan would have got into the public domain, so quickly they sold 100 CDs, and the cover on the right is not photoshopped. That's actually what it looked like. They went to eBay quite quickly, and it went to a handful of stores, not just one. It had to be EU-wide in more than one country. It had to be purchasable. And that's how our economy works, particularly the content mafia. And in other places too, you keep wondering what. In Great Britain, Great Britain exports natural gas, and they import it as well. So when you think when you import and export, you buy cheaply and export expensively, but that's not always happening in the UK. When the Guardian looked, they noticed that in the months when there was a scarcity and people had to heat, then the price within England was raised so much that they were exporting for less than they were paying for the imports, and someone went very angry.
In these times of economic uncertainty, people always like to have gold as some sort of investment. And someone who has a lot of gold is the New York Investment Bank. And in order to get that gold out of that bank, you have to wait for 7 years. And there have been some conspiracy theories that we have, well, basically never mentioned, that they have been using this gold for other purposes. And the German Bundesbank felt necessary to prove that the gold was still there, and they told the Americans that they would like to have it back. And the Americans said, well, that's not a problem. You will have it in 7 years. Now we have here some other items for which you also had to wait for 7 years, just for the purpose of comparison. And we also have some assumptions how the Fed actually is delivering that gold, probably like that. Well, after all, the Bundesbank managed to get 37 tons of gold back home. So they had that program and they said, we don't trust the Americans anymore. We want to have 37 tons of that gold back home. They don't say that out loud, but still, they would like to have it there. I mean, it's not bad, 37 tons, unless you realize that the total amount of gold that the Americans have is 3,400 tons, so they still have a lot of work to do here with their doves. But the title is nice, isn't it? It says Bundesbank manages to get tons of gold back home. So staying at the raw materials, there have been some speculations and some NGOs, some non-government organizations have been complaining that German bank Deutsche Bank is actually participating in speculation with food, and this causes people to starve. And they made a statement and they said there is no proof that these speculations have any connection to the word hunger. So we have this little plot here. Have a look at the scale. This doesn't look as bad as it is, but... So they have been doing this since the year 2000, and prices have risen from about 80 or 90 to over 180 or over 200, and claiming that there is no connection between those two things is courageous, to say the least. We have another... what is that? So while we're talking about speculating with food, well, that is a nice coincidence, because mine were almost gone. So on the barrel it says strategic popcorn reserves. Let's get that popcorn home. It's just like with the gold. That's not bad. All right then. Would you like some too? Well, let's see how much will be left at the end. And there are voices in the audience. Popcorn for everyone. I mean, it's salted popcorn. You know what, let's just carry on. Well, thank you very much to the Raumzeitlabor. We have a new award talking about finances and the strategic popcorn reserves. We have the Thebarts van Elst Award for properly financed large-scale projects. Now, we had a lot of fun with this particular man. We have always been wondering, why is it that all these large projects turn out to be much more expensive than anticipated? Because you would think, well, you start building something. Let's have a look, for example, at the Elbphilharmonie in Hamburg here. What we are seeing on the right is an organizational chart that gives you information about the financial structure of this project, with certain rights and other things. So it gives you a really good overview, and so that's basically the reason why they only overdrew their budget by 210%. You'd think that this is a lot, but 210%, I mean, ooh. But this is not even in the top league. Now this is maybe the regional leak here. They were 265% over the budget. Mr. Maydon here did a really good job. But he can do more than that. I mean, this man has potential. You have to give that to him. I mean, as a manager, that is, I tip my hat to him. And when we look at the Berlin airport, for example, he is 300% over his budget. And it kind of makes you wonder, how does one single man do that? Well, he wasn't alone. He got his chief planner from the Stuttgart train station to the Berlin airport. So I was wondering, where are we standing in the international comparison? Is there still room to grow? Because international benchmarks are always important. Germany as an economic location, we have to pay attention to the international competition, and we saw that we are basically in the middle. We found a couple of things, other projects from around the world. So with 353%, you kind of get into the top 50. But there was this one project. This was in Canada. It was the Canadian Weapon Registry. They managed to go 3,600% over their budget. And this is the big circle on this slide right here. But as we can see, in the area between 250 and 380% for large-scale projects, this is not too bad. Well, traditionally we also have another award, the Vladimir Putin Award for upstanding democrators, basically. And this was a tough competition. It started with David Cameron, the Prime Minister of England. He thought that he had to filter the internet for porn, and then they saw that they didn't have the infrastructure to do that, and they were wondering where to get that infrastructure. They wanted to go to someone who has a lot of experience, so they went to Huawei from China. And when you think about it, such an infrastructure can do more than just filtering out porn. And, well, of course, Mr. Cameron realized that as well, and he said in the parliament, it's all about to counter the extremist narrative. So it's not only porn, but people saying something extremist, including blocking online sites. So blocking pieces of the internet because someone is saying something that this guy doesn't agree with. And of course, it's all in the interest of national security. That is clear. One big problem with the Democrators is that there is this stupid lobby, the lobbyists for information freedom, and people are actually asking for files and they expect to get them, and they tend to make these stupid laws that support these people. So you have to get a little bit tricky to counter that. So for example, when the ACLU, one of the biggest people's rights advocates in the United States, were wondering how to apply these laws, because we have all learned that these laws don't always mean what they say, because there can be additional memos and amendments to these laws. And here is the answer from the NSA. It might be a little, from the FBI, I'm sorry, it might be a little boring. And this, for example, are SMS-Memos. It's doesn't look that different now, does it? But of course you can learn from these shining examples from our big brother from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Especially our chancellor can learn from those. So for example, here we have some notes taken by Mrs. Merkel regarding the Stuttgart 21 train station, and the judge ordered that these documents be released. And as you can see, there is this nice federal eagle on the top of these documents in the same color as the rest of these nice minutes here. Now, I've always been wondering if they're not complaining about the costs for these printouts. They're using an awful lot of toner here. I mean, it's not a fixed value, but you can pretty pin it down how much this really costs. And you would think that you would usually use fax for that, but let's come back to that later. Now there was a little inquiry about the NSA, and the reply from the government was basically, well, you would think that you would get a proper answer, but here you can see what was actually happening. So the question was, how did the German government make sure that intelligence agencies such as the NSA were actually abiding to German law? And the reply from the government was basically, the NSA has confirmed that they do not break German law, and that is basically everything that needs to be said. And for everything else, please look into our safe. There are some additional files here. And can anyone remember that passage from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with these construction plans for Alpha Centauri? In that little safe in the cellar with the spider webs and the crocodiles and everything, that's probably how it must have been right here. Now, even old files, this is something that they are reluctant to publish. For example, the files concerning the death of Mr. Barschel here, for example. It was ruled that these do not need to be made public, and the head of the German intelligence agency, Schindler, he was very happy about that because he didn't have to go into the cellar and fetch all these old files.
All right, so we stay in Europe. This is quite nice. A small dictatorship in the land of free opinion. You can just go to a journal and destroy hard drives. Yeah, so what do you do if you can't destroy hard drives or blacken out documents? Then you just lie. The BMI did this as well, and when they figured it out, they changed the records in the archive.
Ministry of the Interior. Here.
So for the historians, it wouldn't look as though they lied. So the NSU documents, there's also stuff in there that's not too nice. So there were 118 passages that they would have liked to blacken out. So in the end, they really didn't do it, or just partially, so didn't work out for them. But that's probably just their bad luck. So following up to the Snowden revelations, the NSA also showed off their Freedom of Information Acts. So they were really clever. They saved a lot of printer ink. They're just more experienced. And they were really gracious with their documents when they were asked from other governments for help. For example, from Mr. Pofalla, he
Top
wanted
government official in Germany.
So, what do you do as Chancellor of Germany with such people working for you? Well, then you often like to tell people that you trust them completely.
So this is Merkel giving her famous fullest support to the coalition, with the Liberals being continued. It was, but they lost the election in September.
So this was a bowling event happening this year, starting with Schavan, the Ministry of Science,
who got into trouble and received Merkel's fullest support. Until then, she had to give up her position.
And then the Snowden thing started slowly, and then she told the security authorities of Germany that she trusted them completely. They had their complete trust. So this was going quite nicely. But then So we searched really long for how to display these actions of politics, and we found something in the archive. So, for those who don't know this is from the classic movie Casablanca. So, yeah, not too nice for her. She trusted everyone. So, what did they do then? Some decisions had to be made. And again, she gave people their complete trust. What? Me?
And this is one of those that received her trust, withdrawing from politics, but only after the elections and the changes of personnel that took place. But she didn't retain him.
Sort of reminds us of the steps you have to take as an anonymous alcoholic. You have to realize there's a problem, and then you can take further action. So Pofalla wasn't the only one on the list of trust, not the list of firing. So in the same moment, also Hans-Peter Friedrich was fired. He didn't know anything. He really didn't know anything.
Again, only changed post or removed after the election, but he could have stayed on because the party stayed on in government.
Oh. But they found a purpose for him, at least, at the end. So things he likes to do is, for example, talking to peasants.
Yes.
So that's definitely a reason to point him to Minister of Agriculture. And there's been another bad case of trust, the unbroken trust in this case. Not a full trust, or complete trust, but unbroken trust.
So that's Family Minister Christina Schröder, who announced her withdrawal, resignation, and that was when Ursula von der Leyen, another politician, was still happy, but she didn't quite listen, did she?
She didn't quite listen to the unbroken trust.
So what became of her? And then she got this job.
Then
Minister of Defense, which is a difficult job, and she's an upcoming politician. She likes to think.
We always laughed when you could read in the Anglo-Saxon press that Angela Merkel is the most powerful woman on earth. Well, maybe Obama's wife, but this can't be right. So then we searched who else did she trust completely. Also, the Holy Father was removed this year. It's not just limited to Germany. So, yeah, he stepped back as well. Very great pictures. But the series isn't over yet. It still continues. So he's quite well experienced, and he knows Merkel from back long ago.
So that's Thomas de Maizière, the then defense minister, before the election.
And you really have to prepare if after such a situation you get her full trust. So step back, please.
And he was actually moved back to the
sausages.
Interior Ministry after the election.
So even for police work, trust is a very important thing. So another classic at the Fnord News Show, the Inspector Clouseau Award for outstanding police work. Very fruitful year. one of the highlights was the Danish police that
arresting a terrorist because Google Translate wrongly translated their text message. And we were playing around with Google Translate, and particularly old. This screenshot is a few years old. It doesn't work like that anymore, but that's a historic document, symbol of its time, and an outstanding example for great police work was the Boston Marathon after the attack, when American police, with all their grace and glory, could be seen working, and mind that photographers were not really liked here as well, and then other people then in jogging took action, and just note what this guy is carrying with him, and there is a certain critical infrastructure that cannot be closed down, and that's Dunkin' Donuts in this headline, which stayed open at police request. Some very nice images of police people eating Dunkin' Donuts material. Back to Germany, though. Police in Germany has become more close to the net, and someone tweeting a thing like that can then experience a quick response from police. And this CSU member, Bavarian Conservative Party, was visited by police after tweeting, "If Mollard comes free," I don't know what the tweet says. I didn't have time to read it.
Basically said, if you want to know when he becomes free, you can ask Mrs. Merkel at that time, at that location.
Okay. And then someone was mistaken on Facebook, confused with someone else. And here we have a few examples. The then Interior Minister Hans-Peter Friedrich, and another account of the same name. That can happen, of course. Now, sometimes the police is a bit too careful when it comes to averting threats. A very good example are sports events. In this case, just a conspicuous walk was enough to make the police get very strong-handed, and well, at least they had this tent, and this man had to undress, and it was examined in the anal and genital region. Of course, they didn't find anything, but they had a great reason. This was justified and proportionate for the threat, apparently. You have to hand it to them. Well, if you are worrying about or confused about the anal part, police in Darmstadt, well, Darm means guts in German. The name is the motto, and the police, of course, will not shy away from modern technology, not just social media, but drones. The Berlin police has drones by now, and they haven't had them for so long, and then they had to just block the city's motorway because a malfunction in a police drone made it fall down on the motorway. And what was particularly nice was the assumption that a raven had sat on the drone was the one assumption for what went wrong, and that was particularly nice. Now, who of you flies drones? A few hands go up. How many accidents with ravens have you had? It keeps happening, I'll tell you. A classic, isn't it? Not just when carrying out action you get problems, but then when you evaluate them, there are certain problems sometimes with jumping to conclusions if there is an imminent threat. Very harmless 3 men, an asylum seekers housing, but they were actually armed with knives and rings and canisters. So, a picture starts to emerge, and it's the night before the 20th of April, Hitler's birthday. What could that have been? Let's ask the police. Of course, a relationship problem. Obviously, yes, very easily deducible. I would, of course, I would think the same thing immediately. If as a policeman, I would see 3 drunken people with knives and canisters on their way to an asylum seeker's hostel, a relationship problem, of course. Sometimes, if you're busy doing things, you release images too quickly. And there was a bank robbery in Berlin, and one of the traces that the culprits left was the car, and they showed their IDs, and that was self-made, with a photo that they've got from Google Images from anyone, completely unaffected, but the police didn't know that, and of course they don't recognize IDs. They are fake proof now. So an investigation was announced, and the photo made it onto TV until it was found that the guy didn't know of anything. I'm not in Berlin at all. And then it was all back and all in verse, and they pixelated it, and that was quite nice. So if I would have seen the photo now, I wouldn't know if it was the same guy. Then after the mix-up, I wouldn't even know. Still wouldn't know. Now, speaking of jumped to conclusions in evidence, there was another case when Mr. Snowden was at the Moscow airport and held there, and the president of, was it Ecuador? Mr. Morales? No, it was Bolivia. The president of Bolivia, Mr. Morales, with his private jet, his president's private jet, was setting off on a flight and was then forced to land in European airspace because Snowden could have been on board because there was no evidence at all. And sometimes you get police arresting a culprit and doing everything right, we would assume, and then things start going strangely later after that. There was a guy at a crossroads, Times Square in New York, a very large square, and gesturing, and police was called and came there and wanted to arrest the man. He wasn't going to be arrested, and of course then the police took out their guns and wanted to kill him, or shoot him rather, and the way these things go, with gun carriers in state service, they hit just everything but this man. And then the question was, who was now going to pay the bill for the passers-by that were shot? And the police wanted to bill that man, because if he hadn't been there, they wouldn't have shot these other people. Obviously, isn't it? That's quite obvious, isn't it? And of course, as a policeman, you have to mind your image, and because it will suffer otherwise. And the Greek police are way in front there. These things can happen with an arrest. Someone falls downstairs. We all know that. But the thing to do then is to Photoshop out the traces in the arrest photos so that no traces of violence can be seen. And what's conspicuous is what beginners these people are. Even on the projected image from the back, you can see that that's photoshopped, can't you? It's very embarrassing. And sometimes there are big challenges, such as here, a high-speed chase of a man on a mobility scooter. These things, they do about 4 or 5 kilometers, 3 miles an hour, but not with a cargo like that. So, or a question of tuning, maybe. Maybe it was lowered. So we've been wondering what comparison, what other examples can you find, and here you are. And one of the more happy things that we found this year, the legal processing of events that Lothar König from Jena, a priest that was involved in a demo and was charged with all kinds of offenses, and police were getting things so badly wrong, editing videos so that they did no longer reflect reality, and in the end, the court said, let's just finish this, we'll suspend the whole process, because the state prosecution, with all their charges with police edited videos, even you knew that this was all very incomplete. Videos are things that police like to do, of course, in clandestine videos sometimes, and sometimes they get caught. There's an installation by Dutch police with an electricity box to which they changed to take hidden camera videos. But the headline said a box with espionage electronics has been found in Russian espionage. There's a lot of electronics in there, isn't there? It looks expensive. And so it was the police in the end. Nothing to see. Please move on. Yeah, police work contains investigations and publicly searching for people. And Vladimir Putin turned up on a Finland blacklist, and it was noticed after a few days, and he was taken off. But the reason was that he was with this biker gang, appeared on photos with them, and without blushing, and was this. We've mentioned this already. Evil criminals, guarding criminals, is an important task. So London's police spent $16,000 a day staking Assange. The thing is that they never knew whether they would be paid back that money, and a police speaker was asked and said, "We hope to get this back from the Home Office, and we are snooping on Assange for 2 years now on that embassy, and we don't even know if we'll get paid." Basically, yeah. So police work sometimes collides with Secret Services work, as we've seen at the NSU scandal. That's the right extremist killing spree over a few years in Germany. So the guy who was making all these plans for that terrorist group, the right wing, he was actually an informer for the Secret Services, has now changed his name and lives abroad, and details are not known because the files have actually been destroyed by the Secret Service. And also the police authorities do work with internal Secret Services, and then you get cases like police work is mostly simulated. Well, of course, no, there's the most brutal revelations that all gets out in the open. So you go out that no one can say, we haven't done anything. You just go on a drive. We asked the witness, but we were not told to collect anything. Don't find anything. And that then is called a successful operation. So you can't say that they don't do anything, but you just didn't find anything. And then, of course, there are disturbing factors such as lawyers acting for accused people. There was this protest in front of a house, and the police were not let into the flat where someone was held because they said, we saw him come out from this left housing project and thought he was someone who was going to cause a disturbance, and so we disabled the bell, and the lawyer then had to knock on the door, and the person accused was actually denying to be involved with this leftist housing project. He came actually from that lawyer's surgery. But sometimes there's an overlap between the two, isn't there? So in general, you can say that our state prosecutors always have full insights. They don't get anything wrong. They know what to talk about. Now, the top state prosecutor speaking about the NSA scandal and saying there was no evidence for systematic surveillance, but calling the NSA NASA in the process. You feel much more safe that way, don't you? Can we play this later on, perhaps? Now, a frequent thing with police work is that, of course, now the guy gets the Detective Clouseau award for that, of course.
Well, what do you do when you find a body? I mean, it's a lot of work to investigate all this, and who knows what you will find out. Maybe you know beforehand that you won't find anything. So here are some very very clear cases of suicide. There was this young man here. Well, his hands were handcuffed behind his back. He was searched and he was put into the police car, sitting in the back of the police car and dying of a shot to the head. And the police claims that this is a suicide. They don't know where the gun came from, but this is something that keeps happening. And bonus points, this was in December and the guy's name was Jesus. We're getting a little nervous here when someone approaches us from the left. All right.
Is something happening on stage again?
So here's another very clear case of suicide. This is a witness in the NSU process. Police is assuming that he killed himself because he was heartbroken. But there were witnesses who saw that he was going to his car, getting into his car, and then the car exploded. Well, there was no goodbye letter. Maybe he didn't have the time for that. I mean, your heart can get broken rather quickly. There has been legal proceedings in Israel against Olmert. He's no longer the prime minister, but he was before court. It was the land in which this happened is called the Holy Land, on top of all. And after a particularly lively questioning, he suddenly died. And of course, this is also something that happens. I mean, he was pretty old now, wasn't he? And there can also be strange cases if Mr. Putin is not your friend. So, for example, this man here. I mean, it's debatable. Maybe a little Fnordy. There is this Russian oligarch. His son-in-law said he was being depressed. His lawyer says it was suicide. Now, the Russian news agency, who's known for a lot of propaganda, is talking about a heart attack. He was found with
a sling around his neck,
having pretty much hung himself in the bathroom. Now, that Russian newspaper is citing Secret Service sources and claiming that he is actually still alive. But the best classic case of suicide that we have is this former employee of the GCHQ or MI6. He had some sort of sports bag and he was found dead. And this process is, well, the legal proceedings have been going on for years. The details are interesting because this sport bag was locked from the outside with a padlock.
Zipped up, at least.
So here are pictures from an engineer who was tasked with finding out if it is impossible to do that to oneself. But in the end, it's all a question of probabilities, and the experts of Scotland Yard said, well, this is a clear case of suicide now, isn't it? We have a new award this year. It's the Radio Everyone Award. Does anyone know what Radio Everyone is? Well, we kind of suspected that only some of you would know that. Radio Everyone is a classical joke, basically. It's a special form of a joke. Here's an example. Question to Radio Everyone. Can you eat mushrooms from the Chernobyl area again? And the answer is basically yes. So the keyword is also always basically yes, but you cannot have your toilet attached to the public sewer systems. So that is the style of these jokes. There are hundreds of these. Just Google search the internet, you will find hundreds of these. And they're very nice. And we found a couple of things here where we thought, hey, this is very fitting. So this is the first contestant. There's not much to say about this guy. It's
Christian
Christian
Lindner,
Lindner from the Liberal Party here in Germany.
the new head of the Liberal Party after they failed dramatically in the elections.
Right. He claimed we are not capitalists. Basically, yes, but no. Well, there was this contractor who was working for our secret services, and the question was risen why we keep working with these, and there was this answer who was just classic.
We don't have these good people ourselves. We need people that we trust, and this is Louis Defenay, French comedian and famous for his gendarme roles. And here we have them, the guys that
The Minions, I think they're called.
yeah, the minions.
And then there is this story about the death of Osama bin Laden. It's a hero
heroic
story, basically. And it's basically correct, but there are a few minor details. For one, he was unarmed and he did not hide behind his wives. No one resisted, there was no shootout after all. So basically, aside from these few minor details, the story is basically correct. And this one is also something that is basically right. It was at the funeral of Nelson Mandela here. The statement was there are too many leaders who claim solidarity with Mandela's struggle for freedom, but do not tolerate dissent from their own people. Or nor opposition, basically. And again, basically yes, but
Pictures of Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden, of course.
This is a nice one here. This is a guy from German television. He had to deal with a question whether the agency that collects TV fees, if it's okay to talk about data retention there. And he said, we're not retaining anything here. It has to be deleted after 12 months. So talking about data retention is really not the right thing to do here. Everything is deleted after just 12 months. And then there was a story, maybe you still remember that. These
Austerity measures.
austerity measures, basically, yes, thanks. And there was this one study that was conducted. And it turns out that most of the study consisted of people using Excel in the wrong way. And it turned out that questions such as when do you have to start saving big time? Is there a break even at which point the government has to do measures to save, and everything was based on calculation errors, so this didn't hold any water. Here's another interesting thing from Bangladesh. After finding over 500 bodies, the Minister of Finance of this country said basically it's not really serious. And later he went a little more into detail and said these are all individual cases. There are just 500 individual cases at this particular situation here. Now, talking about individual cases, we also have that here in Germany. Individual black sheeps were found manipulating the interest rates, but these were just individual cases, so it's not a big problem. It's not a problem of all of them. And there are some other headlines where we kept wondering how did that happen. And one of the nicest one was when Mrs. Redding was kind of giving up on the Brits. They said they are basically a lost cause. And of course, the topic at hand was data privacy and data protection laws. And here, for example, Obama was asked why everything took so long until everything is investigated. And he said basically, well, I too have to read in the newspaper what the NSA has been doing. So he claimed that he was not informed beforehand about about what the NSA was doing and about the things that we're conducting. And apparently he is also said to have claimed that he is really good at killing people, so you kind of wonder where is the guy that censors all that before it gets out to the public. Now here is the former NSA, the head of NSA, Michael Haidt, and he defended the American efforts to surveil the internet. So he said basically, the internet is ours, we invented it, it belongs to us, and that means that we have the right to surveil everything that we want. The Secret Service of Norway, they have some room for improvement. I think this might have been a question of basically of honor. And there was this headline in a Norwegian newspaper. They revealed that the cell phones of 33 million different Norwegians, they were spied upon by the US Secret Service, and the Norwegians said, hey, wait a minute, that was not the US, that was us. So you have to take a certain pride in your own work. And also, for example, the mayor of London.
You have to show compassion, don't you?
Yeah, he showed compassion for the rich people because he said that they are basically a minority. And basically, you should all knight them, basically. This was not received too well. His Prime Minister, David Cameron, chose the right environment to preach or to ask people to save and to... But was really taking the cake in that area was the police of Bavaria. They came into trouble because they were basically scanning license plates. And one of the reasons was that this might keep people from going to protests, which is basically one of their basic rights. And they basically answered, well, and this is exactly why we're doing all this, to keep people from exercising their right to protest.
Classic in this show is the Richard Nixon Lame Excuse Award, and that we had a number of quite a good amount. It was great this year. There was the Pigs Bay event that goes back some time, doesn't it? Some people may not remember because they were born after it. For security reasons, of course, security first. Yeah, so this will have to be removed. Could you perhaps could you leave us a portion, perhaps? So the Bay of Pigs. Popcorn first. Now, this was about the CIA not wanting to release the files for the Bay of Pigs invasion. And then they were citing a clause in the Freedom of Information Act called Deliberative Process Clause. There are ongoing negotiations whose results depend on these files being kept secret. So, sure, yeah. It's been a while, but, well, yeah, things go slowly in bureaucracy, and yeah, it can take a while. And when then someone didn't want to believe that excuse or challenged it, there was a second excuse. Yeah, well, we could release it. Popcorn being
grabbed, really.
Yeah, vigorously distributed. Some original intervention. Now, who's going to clear this all up, you pigs? I can't hear what the audience...
Looks like they really made an entire barrel of popcorn.
Okay, well, anyway, the second excuse was if we release all this, this will only confuse people. Of course, yeah, very understandable, isn't it? So, now let's go to Turkey. An almost embarrassing information was released, but this was my favorite excuse. They were caught delivering arms to Syria, tons worth of them, and they said, well, these are all sports and hunting weapons, not for military use. First, they denied it completely. This was from a UN authority, but the UN said, well, it's your statistics office that told us. And then they called the statistics office and they said, no, this was not for military use, sports weapons. And we tried to illustrate this, how this would look. Now, if you think this is unrealistic, we have a small video from Syria. How these sport weapons look in use.
And I guess you couldn't hear it, but the guy in the video basically said Allah Akbar.
Yeah, it was also interesting was from the lame excuse column how the Secret Services excuse torturing or looking away when people are tortured, MI6 in this case. And they said they were watching the CIA torturing and were not saying anything because they didn't want to damage their relationship with the CIA, which makes sense, of course. Now, the highlight this year for me personally was this statement from our Interior Minister, Friedrich. The question was, what do we do if a suicide attacker approaches with surveillance cameras help? And the response is, well, if we arrest the attacker the first time, he will not attack a second or third time, the suicide attacker. And for things like that, we need the facepalm image, of course. I hope that they turned out well. Yeah, great. Now, to Mexico, guns from Heckler & Koch, the German arms maker, appeared there in unrest provinces. I don't know what the restriction is supposed to be, but they appeared, and then the question was, how did they get there? And then it turned out that Heckler & Koch exported them there, and Heckler & Koch said, no, that wasn't us. Our employees, without our knowledge, went ahead and did this on their own. We have a symbol here, a symbolic image. And then the Mollad case, where someone was held in a mental asylum against his will and with little evidence, and there was 100 pages of evidence that were to be delivered in his favor, and the judge, it turned out, had simply ignored that. I am not going to read 110 pages, the judge said. And there is this saying that in front of a court and on the high seas, you're in God's hands. And that this was a part of a committee in the German parliament which asked for certain files concerning the NPD, the right-wing party, the right extremist party. And the Internal Secret Services then released a few more files than they had asked for, and that revealed that how many informers they had in that party, and it then turned out that an NPD member was in that committee, and well, then the information doesn't matter, the numbers were wrong anyway. This must have been a federal state parliament. The NPD is not in the federal parliament. And then Merkel about the question why we cannot have new elections and have to enter in this grand coalition between the left and right main parties. Well, if Merkel was not going to be elected chancellor from this coalition, there would have to be new elections, and the Social Democrats simply couldn't finance new election, a new campaign. And here's an image. And one of the people who keep appearing in this presentation, the current NSA head, General Alexander, and he said, well, I would resign, but it's not possible. That would look as if Snowden had won. And a bit embarrassing was that a little later he actually said that he was going to step down. And the interesting thing there is I was told that by people that know these events a bit more close hand, for the last few years, he kept saying he'd be staying on just for one more year and then resign, so that people that would target him would say, oh, well, he's only going to be there for another year. It doesn't matter to focus on him. So it will be interesting to see if in March he will actually have stepped down. And then the category cannot pass by this thing. This is Clapper, the Secret Services coordinator in the US. And in a Senate hearing, he said, no, we are not listening to Americans. We're not monitoring them, at least not at mass scale. And it then turned, not intentionally. And then it turned out that wasn't the complete truth, which would actually carry a prison sentence of 10 years or something. So the fact that he's not in prison is actually incredible. And then they asked why. Why are Americans? Why did he lie to Senate? And then he said at first, well, it was the least untruthful manner in which you could say that he wasn't allowed to say. And then he said, the Patriot Act, I did forget that completely. Now, controlling secret services is something that is in all our minds now. How does this actually work? Now let's look to Great Britain. They said first, the parliamentary committee said they were way too busy to this Snowden thing. We just don't have time for that. There are much more urgent things, probably loo paper budgets or something. And then they said, well, we could hold hearing and we'll do that on TV for transparency, but not at real time because there could things slipping out. Things could slip out and what then happened was a total pantomime because they knew the questions in advance. They had been rehearsing. The members of parliament had handed in their questions and the Secret Services chiefs actually practiced with actors how to respond. And if that isn't transparency and Secret Services control, I don't know what is. And then in the US, there's all kinds of controls and transparency and reform, and we have an exclusive image here, which we found how this process looks like, what it looks like, and this is the commission for at work. Everything gets better, and this is the badge of the CIA or the. And one of the things I noticed this year, there was a large amount of stories. When at the end had the excuse, well, it was planned for a long time, it was routine. For example, it started with flights by B-2 bombers. These are the biggest nuclear bombers that the US have, stealth bombers. And they sent those to South Korea and said, no, this is not a provocation. It was planned a long time. And we keep doing this always, and we're not provoking anyone now. And then it continued with another routine exercise planned for a long time at the height of the Syrian conflict, when it looked like a military strike was imminent, just a question of time, and everyone was on hair trigger and alert, and ships could be seen racing across the Mediterranean Sea, and it did look like a typical Cold War between the phony war, proxy war between the large powers, and then there really was a missile launch, which was an Israel-US routine exercise for about half an hour. We were sitting looking at the news tickers, news agency output, and it was just the Russians that said, we have a blip on our radar screen. It looks strange, but that blip looked like an intercontinental missile. And I don't know, those that know the Cold War, Russians and Americans, if they see blips on the radar looking like an intercontinental missile, it's not that nice. You may remember War Games, that movie, blips on the radar there that looked like intercontinental missiles. You have the hand on the buzzer, and of course this was all planned long term. They just forgot to alert the other side. These things can happen. And another long term plan was the flight over by B-52 bombers across these disputed Chinese islands, which the Chinese now call their own, or regard as their own, regular exercise. Taiwan and the Japanese regard this as their own. So you just fly some hardware. The only thing you have is B-52 bombers. Is a bit larger and has a certain range, and it's nice and noisy, so you notice. And we have a special section here within the Excuse Awards for typography. And that started with Edward Snowden being arrested or stuck in Hong Kong, and the US had their extradition request, and that wasn't accepted because they only did not specify the J in Edward J. Snowden. Or whether that J is Joseph or James, that wasn't specified. And this is the judge. And then Mollard was finally released from the mental asylum after a typography problem. There was a document that had to be argued away, and the excuse then was it was signed in substitute, and that was the reason for not really regarding the document. And NSA is also playing a part in the typography section. There was a question how much traffic they actually listened to, and then they had a slip in the decimal point, a factor of 10. Well, never mind that. Difference between a little traffic and a very small amount of traffic. They're in good company. Getting a slip in the decimal points. They built a submarine 70 tons too heavy after putting a decimal in the wrong place. And the good news is that it can still dive. The thing with actually getting back to the surface, well, that's something different. And then in the U-boat category, which we like, there was another nice incident, and that was a U-boat that in the Gulf of Hormuz in front of the Iranian coast had a problem with its periscope and collided with a fishing vessel. And exclusive video was leaked to us how this went ahead. Now, this is from the famous German movie Das Boot, isn't it? It must
yeah,
be.
I think it is. So he's just ordering the guys to go down to periscope level.
Yeah. And this is from a different movie, I think. Yeah, this is Bud Spencer. I don't know which movie it is. Or it's the same one. And we got it wrong.
It was not Das Boot, it must have been something else.
I have no idea what's going on.
Definitely not Das Boot.
No. No, it wasn't. No.
The Mielke Schilly Award for Maximum Distance to Reality, that is our next award.
No, this field was also saw heavy competition. Now, General Atomics, who built drones called Predator and Reaper that are used in the Afghanistan war, and they found themselves completely misunderstood because their drones have such a bad reputation. These are pistols, cannot have anything to do with the name, of course. Predator and Reaper, here we go. These are Predators and Reapers, and like I said, Keith Alexander keeps appearing in this show. you have to say, we just hope that he won't resign. He's got talent. Now, to say that we're just wildly collecting data, it would sound as we would want to monitor the whole world. Yes, exactly. And then another picture for large distance to reality. Germany is not a surveillance state, says Angela Merkel. It's a state of freedom. Well, I sometimes worry that she would announce the fullest support for the whole German people. What would happen then? That would be the moment where you could start thinking about a long holiday. Another nice example for distance to reality was the response by Clapper, we remember, to the question why they actually listen to all this. And he said that they want an early warning in the case of an international financial crisis. And that worked very well, didn't it? Exactly like the terrorist attacks. We prevented them all, these financial crises, didn't we? So the proof of efficiency has been made. Killing people is something they don't really do. No, we don't do killings. Drone killings do not take place. We do not do assassinations. What we do is actually targeted killings against enemy combatants, but that's something completely different. And then the prize for the maximum distance to reality is, of course, Mr. Pofalla, Chief of Staff of the Chancellery, a top official in the German government, coordinator, who said the scandal is over after a few weeks because they had some communications with the US, and particularly for announcing that after declarations from the US and British services that they keep to German laws. And then the Henry Kissinger section for Realpolitik, that's a bit depressing, actually. But we'll get there. We'll start with the Heute Journal, one of Germany's news programs. Klaus Kleber used to be the news announcer, but they do their own pieces in that. And well, it has to be said to round off that no one's talking about a war at the current time in Syria. We're talking about a limited military strike as a punitive measure. That was, and this is the head of the Social Democrats asked whether he would enter into a grand coalition, and responding no, and then Obama, seeing no problem with having received the Nobel Peace Prize and his planned strike against Syria. And of course, he has something else to do, testing anthrax with children. Now, this was one of the most difficult ethical reviews that the Bioethics Board has ever conducted. Now, this is an ethics panel passing judgment on these trials. And then there was a Fallscherer in Sweden, who the prosecutor wanted to get into jail because if prison sentences are possible, if that is the grounds for searching houses in the future. So that's why this particular person had to go to jail. A nice example of Realpolitik was the Department of Homeland Security, who had a few problems with people complaining that
that they got into no-fly lists, and one of them was actually successfully going to court with this.
And a witness couldn't appear because he was put on the no-fly list.
So he couldn't get to the trial.
Yeah.
Fighting him getting onto the no-fly list.
Australia, the top part is possible worldwide. The internal secret services in Australia raided an office lawyer's surgery while he was representing victims in a case against the government. Now, the interesting thing that are marked in yellow, they didn't want to show the search warrant because that would be related to security, of course. And then the Bavarian police, a violent police person, was allowed to stay in office. He had beaten up and raped his former girlfriend. and police guaranteeing your security is the motto. And then you have people protesting against all these inconveniences, and they get on their nerves. So there was a very pragmatic solution found. First Amendment areas, cordoned off areas very far away from the actual event, if a politician would appear. And but still these people get on nerves if you have protests against fracking or something. So it gets more expensive, $5,000 to protest against drilling. You have to be. It has to be worth that to you. And then I would. And the Spanish, eager to learn from the Americans, said that by participating in protests, you would be fined or charged about €6,000. You have to democracy. You have to value democracy, basically. And Realpolitik sometimes goes further than the spoken word. In this case, it was revealed that the German finance ministry ran shady deals using Irish shell firms to balance their budget. And well, it smells a bit strange because they kept complaining about the Irish tax oasis being, or any kind of tax oasis, complaining against those. Switzerland was an example that was targeted, and then an old friend, the Maggie Thatcher Award for Sustainable Infrastructure Destruction. One of the organizations that are very good, this was mentioned already, the NASA. They had a problem with an astronaut almost drowned in his suit because a leak from the cooling circuit caused water to drip into the helmet. So what do? You invent a workaround, a snorkel, through which the astronauts from a lower part of the suit can still get air. But the nice thing about this image was the NASA speaker that demonstrated this. It looks very convincing, the quality of work from that authority. And then critical infrastructure, there exists in the digital area as well. We know that better than many, and the NIST is not just responsible for crypto, but they also have a database about all known software weaknesses, and this was hacked. That was a bit embarrassing. But this can happen.
Another example for critical infrastructure is, of course, the train service. And this is in Belgium. They bought quality trains from an Italian company. And there are some epic pictures about the state of these trains. These pictures, by the way, are all taken from official reports. So that's what these trains actually looks like. You can really feel safe in these trains. These, by the way, are the batteries. They kind of sort of exploded. So apparently some heat was released here. I guess it's kind of understandable why the German agency for train and the train services and for the railways are reluctant to give new train types the permission to run on German tracks. They have made some bad experiences in the past. So what they always do is they just keep these trains as some sort of reserve when other trains cannot run, for example, during the winter months. And the most epic case of infrastructure apocalypse really was these savings measurements in the US after they were not able to get a new budget. So the US Army said they were very sorry, but they could not tweet anymore. Everything was closed, the museums were closed, the national parks were closed. It's kind of surprising that they came out of this whole mess in one piece. But as we can see in Europe, even new pieces of infrastructures that are built can be apocalyptic, as we can see on this great building, the nickname of this building is a walkie-talkie. Now, the problem with this building is it is shaped like a certain curved mirror, and the way it is shaped, a parabolic mirror, it was really melting the cars that were parking on the street level. And what was especially interesting was how the architect reacted to this. He basically said the reason for this is that the sun is up in the sky so high and there are surprisingly few clouds, so it's really the sun's fault. It later turned out that he constructed a different building where the same problem happened, and they spent a lot of money to cover the windows with some sort of sheet that would reduce the amount of reflection. So in this case, for example, they had to get rid of sewage,
waste.
basically. Yeah. And as you can see, they apparently put this into the wrong hole, and they ended up pumping this into the local subway station. I guess that must have smelled bad. And even the NSA sometimes cannot save their infrastructure from the apocalypse. They have a new data center with all sorts of fences and apparently the hardware broke down due to meltdowns, and maybe this was strategic, maybe it was the sysadmin's fault, but apparently strategic failures of hardware can also happen in the US. Sometimes infrastructure is involved that really makes you sad. For example, the fax machine that you could use to address your Freedom of Information request to the Pentagon. They had one fax machine to receive these faxes, which was broken. They would have bought a new one, but due to financial problems, they couldn't buy one right away, maybe next year. So right now it's not possible to address your queries to that agency. But the nicest apocalypse this year, if you can say this, was in Texas, where a factory that would produce fertilizers exploded. This is, by the way, this is not photoshopped. People have made these photos. Not much was left of this factory. Now, you would think that a factory that produces fertilizers was located in the middle of nowhere, but look at this map, was actually in close vicinity to that factory. There are hospitals, there are schools, there are nursing homes close to that fertilizer plant. So this has been a case of privatization. I mean, there turned out that there was a procedure where you would hand in certain papers stating how dangerous you actually are, and they basically checked the boxes that said, we are not dangerous at all, nothing can happen, everything is safe. What's interesting in this picture here is what they used is basically a so-called nuclear blast impact calculator here, which is a script that you normally use to see, to calculate the effects of a nuclear explosion. And they were using that apparently because the explosion in that fertilizer plant is the next biggest thing after a nuclear explosion, really. And sometimes nature strikes back. We have had this a couple of times in the last year, so we added a new category for that. And this sometimes has a certain amount of irony. For example, this employee of a creationism museum has been injured by a lightning while he was on the job. So apparently he angered his god. And we keep seeing more and more of these strange mutations, if you will, not only around the Chernobyl and Fukushima areas, but in other places as well. For example, in Iran, there are apparently mutated rats, and they're using snipers to take out these rats. Unfortunately, we don't have any real pictures, so we just substituted something here. But if they are using snipers, then this must be a big problem. In Fukushima, they also have problems with rats. Apparently, they have been chewing through cables and through pipes, and this has caused the cooling system to break down. So they actually sent some sort of robots into that to basically get the bodies of the rats out of there. Now in Florida, on the other hand, they have giant snails. And what's interesting about that is that the Americans, they don't build proper houses. And it turns out that these snails, they eat the material that they use in Florida to build their houses. And apparently they build houses of their own, big ones. Not only planet Earth is involved, there are also problems in orbit. They have microbes that seem to attack metal and also glass. So for those people who think, okay, I'll move into space, you still have problems, other problems, but you have problems. The statements are also nice. The Russians basically said, well, we have known this for a long time. We had the same problems with our space station. This is just the kind of stuff that happens. Then we had these ants that seem to like electronic devices and seem to make themselves at home in, for example, cell phones. They came to the United States in some way, and I was wondering if they would be able to survive in Utah. I have not found an answer for that.
And piranhas to still exist. Here's a simple photo. A new section that we have is repenting. Not only individual cases, but sometimes people just stop seeing things that they did in such a previous way, such a positive way. And one example comes from the Al-Qaeda circles, and there was a terrorist attack, and media started to investigate this guy who was found out to have been working for Al-Qaeda, and he had been thrown out because he hadn't been handing in his travel expenses. And Al-Qaeda sometimes regrets things, repents, cutting off the wrong person's head. These things can happen, of course. And the AWF admitted getting wrong the calculations for the Greek reforms that they were calling for. And, of course, these things can happen. And the man that built Guantanamo admitted that it should never have been built. That's, of course, insight or the first step on the path to improvement. And the guy that is responsible for the bailout at the Federal Reserve said, "I am sorry, America. I can only say a big mistake. Never should have happened, but the greatest backdoor Wall Street bailout of all time." A bit late, that insight. What did they print? $85 billion a month that the Fed then buys without the Chinese being involved. So, right, we're almost at the end, and I think this is the last category. Yes. You remember three-headed monkeys, the last category. We have introduced it. Who doesn't know what's meant? Okay, thanks.
So apparently no one lifted his arm.
So we'll start with an old friend whom we know from previously. So when all these Snowden things came out, there was an increased demand for three-headed monkeys, and it started on the 19th of July with Mr. Hayden, whom we know. And he said, well, the Chinese will all hack us. We're so much under threat. And then then there are nihilists, anarchists, activists, lulsec, anonymous, 20-somethings who haven't talked to the opposite sex in 5 or 6 years as an enemy. So we thought, who's on that picture?
To be honest, I don't know.
Yeah, that wasn't enough, though. Not everyone was turned to terrorist alarmist mood, so there was an official alarm that was raised. US issues global travel alert, closed embassies due to Al-Qaeda threat. But then that wasn't sufficient still, so the former news magazine, Der Spiegel, as we like to call it, the new terror manager from Al-Qaeda, did he hand in his travel expenses? And if all these things don't help, if Chinese cyber and Al-Qaeda terror doesn't help, what then do you use? Cyber terror. We will all die. There will be a major cyber event, serious impact on American society. And the last line, she warned of terrorist threats, major weather events, and the need to reinforce US border security. So the weather has conspired against us as well. Yeah, so that's it. In 2 hours, we've finished on time, actually. If you want to hear more, there's a small podcast that we sometimes update. Alternativlos, without alternative. Thanks for listening. Also, thanks for listening to us. Feedback under the hashtag 30C3EN. And if you find the extra pun that we inserted that was not in the original, you get extra credits for tweeting that back to us. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Speak to you soon.
Haben wir eine Q&A-Session? Ich hätte nämlich eine Frage.
Ja, stimmt.
Das weiß ich.
Die Frage stellt sich ja.
Honk. Wann gibt's mehr Alternativlos?
Bald.
Sorry, we signed off early. We actually missed what was said. Well, take your waste with you, take your neighbors with you. So this was a drawing that was produced. We don't know what the actual idea was behind it.
I think you can find it on your way to Hall G. I think it's on the right-hand side.
You will be able to find it.
I think you should be able to find it here on the conference.
Okay. We'll look forward to seeing it and critiquing it from an artistic point of view.